Most overhyped, and that's tough because there's a lot. I would say replacing people. I don't see the value in replacing people, and I think the much more valuable thing is if we use AI to elevate people and to allow them to get more work done, be more fulfilling, exploring areas that nobody's looking at. I think that's much more fascinating, personally, to focus on, and honestly, it points to a world I'd much rather live in than one where we don't have any need for it.
Hello and welcome to PMP with Prachi, the podcast dedicated to helping you master your project management and transition from a manager to a project leader. Today on the show, we are joined by a leader who is quite literally redefining how we see the physical world through the lens of AI. Zach Rattner is CTO and co-founder of Yembo, a company that has turned a visionary idea into multi-million-dollar reality with best-in-class AI. Before founding Yembo in 2016, that is way before AI and ChatGPT was even a thing, Zach was a powerhouse of Qualcomm, where he led internal innovations program and specialized in modern software and early stage incubation. He is prolific inventor with 30 US patents to his name. Beyond the code, he is the author of Grow Up Fast, Essence from an AI Startup, and also an international speaker who helps organizations unlock the data they already own to capture the massive gains. Whether he's sharing his insights on LinkedIn top AI voice or contributing to a top 2% developer on Stack Overflow, Zach is at the forefront of the conversation on how AI can add more meaning to human work. Zach, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Prachi. Happy to be here.
So Zach, in 2016, when like I said, wasn't even a thing, you saw a specific potential in AI that led you to start Yembo. Since then, you have grown into a multi-million-dollar company. So for our listeners who are just meeting you, could you give us a brief overview of your background and your core mission behind Yembo's AI-based virtual home surveys?
Sure. So I've been a software engineer my whole career. I majored in computer engineering and then got my first job at the telecom giant Qualcomm. Spent about 5 years there before venturing out and doing my own thing, now known as Yembo. And what we're doing at Yembo is we are taking these tedious and error-prone in-person visits in the home services world, and we digitize that process. So the two markets that we're focused on right now are property insurance and moving. And in both of these markets, if somebody needs to give a quote, say you're moving from San Francisco to London, somebody needs to physically come to your house, identify all the objects that are there, make an inventory list for customs. And in the insurance space, maybe a pipe bursts and you need to reconstruct a room. How many square feet of drywall are there? So these are all workflows that generally take a long time. They generally have unhappy customers because people are at a stressful point in time where something's gone wrong or they're uprooting their life. And we're building this cutting edge computer vision technology and bringing it into this process so you can not have to spend 60 to 90 minutes in an in-person visit, but you can spend 10 to 20 minutes in a video chat. And the AI can identify all the right objects that need to be detected, can take on measurements. And that's really the problem that we're solving is we want everybody to have a great sort of Amazon or Uber style experience, but in these relatively low tech industries where everything's done with pen and paper.
So how did you come up with the idea when, this AI thing was not even a thing? So how did that come to your mind that let's start a business where, no one is there?
It's a fair question. And I write about this a bit in my book, Grow Up Fast, where we talk about the value of dual expertise, where there were two different worlds that I was living in at that time. So I had my day job. I was working on AI technology, and there was this new academic benchmark that had come out called ImageNet, where universities and research labs were competing to make the best vision AI. I mean, you can think of ImageNet like a 1,000-way multiple choice test. So if I hold up a picture and say, Prachi, what's in this picture? As a human, you can pretty easily tell, like, oh, that's a horse, that's a living room, that's a kitchen. And the goal would be to have AI run through and solve that. So back in 2015, Microsoft submitted a solution to this challenge, and they had crossed the threshold that humans were benchmarked at. So for the first time in history, computers had become better than people at identifying objects and images. Relatively few people knew about it at the time, but the science had finally been known on how to do that. And then At the same time, my wife was working at a international division of a moving company, and we had gotten married. We're both East Coasters, but we had gotten married and moved out to California. And as part of that process, the company offered her a remote work agreement. So she was working from home, and our living room became the back office of a moving company. So by day, I was learning about all these wild and interesting things that AI is now capable of doing. And I'd come home from work and I would see all the back office logistics that it takes to run an international moving division. So those two thoughts stayed in my head for quite some time. And the more that I learned about the space, the more I realized that it's just really logistically complicated. And the AI can really help because if you forget to identify a room or a garage or a shed, that can be the difference between everything fitting on the truck or not fitting on the truck. And what we found was a lot of these downstream problems that happen come up because there's a mismatch in expectations when the job is first quoted. So that initial contact where you go through and build that inventory list where we're using the AI today is the most crucial point in this process, because if you forget that there's another 6,000 pounds of goods in the garage or something along those lines, that can have pretty significant downstream implications in terms of the quality of the move.
Okay, I see. And we are going to dive deeper into AI. So, just to set the stage for someone new to AI, what fundamental concepts should they understand first to get a clear picture of the technology?
Sure. So AI is an umbrella term. It means a lot of different things. And as an engineer, I like to go kind of from the bottom up, looking at what's possible instead of just reading like marketing headlines where it seems like everybody promises everything. At the end of the day, AI is a set of algorithms that are probability based. So I think one big thing to mention if you're a newcomer is this doesn't work like normal software. With normal software, it's completely deterministic. You click the button, a window pops up, you type in your password, you click login. It's very black and white, if this, then that. But AI lives in the probability domain. And that means that you'll have situations where the AI is 72% sure that it heard you say a certain word. And that sort of opens up other implications in terms of user interfaces. And one of the areas that I advocate for is to not just simply take a workflow that a person's doing and try to completely automate it. That generally fails. But if you look at a process that your company has to go through, there are usually choke points or inefficiencies because of the manual work involved. And if you use AI to kind of speed up certain steps of the process, that has a much higher likelihood of success than just trying to like rip everything out and replace it with a big black box called AI. So there's a bunch of different areas that you can kind of focus in on, but I would just say getting the workflow right and making sure that that's sound. I think that's really key. And that's where I see a lot of people go wrong when an initiative ends up failing, is they usually have mismatched expectations between what they want to achieve and what the reality of the technology actually is.
So, we will come back to AI, but before that, you mentioned that you were a software engineer and you started your own company. So, what is the single hardest habit for a high level corporate engineer to break when they become the CTO or the co founder of nearly 100 people company?
I think the hardest thing to get used to is there's not a department to do everything that needs to be done. And in the corporate world, there's a lane that you're expected to stay in. If you're a software engineer one, your job is to do software engineer one tasks, do a good enough job for a long enough time, get promoted to software engineer two, maybe at some point become a manager. And there are all these needs that come up in the business, but there are usually these other teams that can handle that. I think when venturing out into startup land, you have to do a lot of things that you've never done before. And on paper, you may not feel qualified to do. So I know for me, one of the hardest parts was having to publicly present and exhibit at trade shows and engage in the sales process. My co-founder and I set a policy for our company that we wanted to do the first million in annual recurring revenue in sales ourselves because the product was really nascent. We hadn't really like landed on product market fit yet at that point in time. And we wanted to hear the objections directly and basically inform the trajectory the company was going on. But $1 million is quite a bit of money. So being able to go through and do that process on your own, you have to put yourself out there. So we had to design booths, go to trade shows, do the outreach, set up the meetings, follow up afterwards, handle the objections. Once the contract gets signed, then you have to train people, you have to do the accounting, send the invoice, follow up if it's not paid on time, all of these little details that amount to running a business. And if you looked at my resume and you looked at the job, you would probably say this person is not qualified to do that task. And I think the biggest mindset shift is that you shouldn't compare yourself to what an expert in that space would do. You have to compare yourself to the other alternatives available to you. And in that case, the bar, I think, just becomes a lot lower to enter into these other areas. And now, as time goes on, we've hired a lot of people in these other areas, but I feel like we wouldn't have gotten to that point if it wasn't for a willingness to go there and do something first and risk, honestly, maybe being bad at it. I had never designed a trade show booth before, and I had never done these things before. I'm sure if I went back and watched what I had done before, I'd cringe on some of those things. But that idea of like doing what's necessary to bring the business forward, as opposed to doing what I feel qualified to do because I had done it before. It's relatively easy for me to tell you this, but I think much harder to live it out and to go and do these things without just like hearing your heartbeat in your head because you're so nervous.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't have to know everything. You can gain experience from doing stuff, but taking that risk is something which somebody, not everybody can do that. So the passion and risk taking capacity is something which stood out for you, I guess.
Yeah, I also was very fortunate. I had a friend who was a few years older than me. He was in grad school when I was in undergrad, and he worked at this startup that didn't work out. So they ended up going out of business a couple of years later. And he went on to get a job at Amazon. And I had another friend who just graduated and went straight to Amazon. They were a similar age, both older than me. And so at this point in time in my career, where I think I was a sophomore or junior, like starting to think about what I'm going to do after college, but not quite like, imminently having to deal with any big decisions yet, they're going through this. And what I saw happen was in the interview process, when the friend who was at the startup was interviewing at Amazon, he ended up coming in. I think it was like 2 or 3 promotions higher than the person who had just stayed and gone directly to Amazon. Because in the interview process, they asked, have you led a team before? Had you made product management decisions? Have you handled procurement? Have you negotiated with vendors? There's all this list of tasks that he could look them in the eye and speak credibly to that he had done before. And that's when I realized that the startup life is really alluring. Is sure, you don't have training wheels, and if things go wrong, they can go really wrong. But in terms of like the skills that you're learning, it's like feels like you're moving at like warp speed, like maybe 10 years in corporate life is 1 year in a startup. And I think it was really helpful having that kind of in the back of my head. And I did end up going into a larger company. I did want to learn engineering at scale. So working at a big company where they're shipping billions of units of whatever the product is, I think you do learn good best practices. So I'm not anti big company, but I do think it's helpful to kind of be mindful about the skills that you're accumulating and what trajectory that's putting you on. And then just deciding if that's what you want, then great, stay there. But if there are other avenues that you'd prefer, just looking at ways to accumulate those skills so that you're able to do a good job when you get into them.
Yeah. In big companies, we definitely get that experience. But if it's a startup, you get whole bunch of new skills and experience it because you are building from scratch. And that's something which you are building for yourself. So you are more passionate about doing thing, getting things done and doing things. So it's absolutely a different experience altogether working in a startup company. But why did you choose this specific industry, like traditional sector, as your initial battleground for AI? What was the biggest cultural hurdle in getting these companies to trust algorithms over the manual site visits?
Sure. And I think this is really key if your listeners are thinking about starting their own initiatives is there's sort of a myth that I found, and we kind of talk about this in the book as well, around the ideal startup idea. And one of the common things that I see among college students or friends who are thinking of starting their own company is they go to Google. I guess nowadays maybe ChatGPT, and they'll have an idea and they'll Google and they'll see, has anyone done this before or am I the first? And I get it. I mean, you need to be differentiated if you're running a company, but I don't think that that is really all there is to it. I don't believe that there's a universally good or bad startup idea. I think it depends a lot on the founding team. And like I had mentioned earlier in our conversation, that dual expertise where I felt like I had early insight into what was happening in the AI industry. And I also had insight into the logistics sector through my wife's work. That sort of gave me a leg up where, sure, there were people that knew more about logistics than me. Sure, there were people that knew more about AI than me. But we put the two of those together. Now, the pool of available competitors has gotten a lot smaller. So I think when you're evaluating an idea, you really do need to look at not just is the market viable, but if you look at the DNA of the team and what that company, the connections, the skill sets of the founding team, I think that can really make or break the startup idea where you take the right idea, put the wrong team behind it. Could be a brilliant idea, but it won't work. So I think that's where having that dual expertise and then finding where can you feel like you make a big impact. And you had mentioned challenges. I think just to kind of summarize it, we were not selling to what I guess a marketer would call a mature market. And that's not a pejorative term. It just means that the solution that we were offering doesn't have a lot of established competitors. So, as a counter example, if I go and I work at Gmail and I want to sell you and you use Outlook, it's like known how you go and you flip that account. Everyone uses email, it's kind of established, the feature sets are there, it comes down to price, distribution, whatever. And that's considered to be a mature market. But when you're pioneering AI, what we found was there was nobody else using AI in these workflows. And some people weren't even using technology. Like some people were using pen and paper or just like estimating over the phone. So the playbook of when you call a company and you want to explain what services Yembo offers is you don't really have that like established track record of what they feel is important, what they would like to see out of the tool. And I think it's an interesting problem to solve as an engineer where you get to kind of be a magician in the sales process as you show things that people don't think are possible and then you explain how it goes into the workflow. But I think that does also open up a set of challenges where you don't really know how the other party is going to react because they may have unreasonable expectations about AI, expect it to do something that's not even possible. You may have people that understand that it makes it more efficient, but maybe they're not measuring. So it's really hard to tell, are you more efficient? Because if you're not tracking, you don't necessarily know. And I think that's been one of the more challenging parts around where you walk in, we know what our technology does, we know what it can do, but especially back in the early days when most of these inspections weren't even happening digitally, we had someone tell us, I don't think anyone would be willing to do this over the phone. I only go in person. Like, didn't even get a chance for the technology to do anything. It was just a blanket dismissal. Now, fortunately, now 10 years later, we see that less, but I think it is a real struggle if you're starting out and just completely pioneering in a new space, is no one's gone before you and figured out what the common objections are. So you have to kind of figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, it's of course difficult because it's a niche, nobody knew about it, and selling them the product. So it's quite challenging, especially when there was an established thing already and you are competing with them. So it's unusual and it's quite challenging. Now, circling back to AI, despite all these promises, many AI projects fail to make it out of the lab. Based on your experience, what does AI often fail in the real world, and what is the key to overcome those failures?
Sure. I would say the biggest AI failures that I see are failures of expectation. They're more people problems than technical problems. The AI capabilities are pretty awesome. It's not the end all be all solution to everything, but I do think there are lots of capabilities that even 6 months ago I would tell you are not possible, but today are. So it's rapidly evolving. And when I look at companies that have deployed it successfully and are seeing great gains, and I compare that to people who are struggling, I think there are a few pitfalls that come up. If there are two that I could just highlight here, I think the first one is thinking through the incentives, not just for the C suite. Usually, a CEO, CFO, people like efficiencies at that level. They like cost savings. I would say, like, getting buy in at that level is usually pretty easy, all things considered. But where things get tripped up is the individual contributors who would use the tool, the middle management. And I would say a good AI deployment plan factors in all of those layers of management. So you can't just sell to the CFO and say, hey, we're going to take your workflow and make you X% more efficient. You have to make sure that there's something that's in it for the individual contributors or the middle managers. Otherwise, you'll run into deployment hurdles. A lot of times it's easy to blame the AI and then it doesn't go anywhere. So I think really thinking through how your company does incentive structures, how your company operates, like what metrics are things that people get promoted based off of, and then thinking through how those might change. A common piece with AI that makes it really powerful is tasks that used to take a lot of work can now take relatively little work. That's why like ChatGPT is so awesome. Um, but if you are incentivizing this unit of work that has now become really easy, you can have pushback from employees if their incentive structures go away. So what we're seeing is shifting more towards outcome-based incentives as opposed to work-based incentives. So if I say, hey, your job is to get through this stack of tasks in the back office and I expect you to do 10 a day. So if you do 15, there's like a bonus that you get. That's sort of not really making a lot of sense if the AI makes it a lot easier to go through those. But if you say, hey, this stack of work that you get through, this helps us make more business. So now you get a commission. I think aligning those incentives can be really key. But also, it takes some time to think through. And it's often not what's top of mind when people just see the AI tool. So I do think encouraging folks to think through who are all the stakeholders that are involved in this and how do we have their day to day work. That's pretty key. And the second one is kind of similar to it, and that is to get alignment around what realistically you expect to happen next. I think one promise that's a bit overblown about AI is sort of this expectation that everything's going to change overnight. And if your IT team needs to integrate with third party systems, that can take some time. And we can see issues if somebody signs up for an AI tool, they expect to have like value on the next day. And then internally, it maybe takes 6 months to build out an integration or 3 months to build out an integration. Then there can be pressures to pull the plug before things have really been set up. And I think it's just being reasonable when you go into that process, scoping it out with all the right stakeholders. The best AI deployments I've seen don't just happen in the IT team. You have HR, you have operations, you have IT, you have security, compliance, all of the different stakeholders who are involved. And one of the key metrics that we like to advocate for when we're talking to folks is like what your pilot time frame is. And if you talk to different departments and you hear like 30 days on one and 180 days on the other, we usually try to reconcile that upfront around why are there differences? Are there things that you can do to kind of reduce the scope to get the timeline in or make certain things contingent? Like, let's get you ROI in this one business unit, and then we'll do the big tech integration after that once we've kind of got some proof points under our wings and things like that. But I think like getting everybody aligned on that time to value piece is really key. 'Cause otherwise, it may not work out, or you may not be giving it the time that it needs to actually mature inside the company. Lots of more things I could talk to you about, but I think those are the kind of the main two that I see most often.
And now a lot of news media, when they talk about future like this, they focus on what could go wrong. And that makes sense, right? There's a lot that could go wrong, and we should talk about that so we could keep it from going or doing wrong things. So what are the big challenges we can come over, and what bucket do you think about when you think about the future?
I think the big topic that more people should be talking about is accountability. Is as an employee, if I'm given a task from my manager and I do a bad job, there's accountability, right? In the software development world, there are pull requests, and I share code that I want to change in the code base. And if I make a mistake or it has a side effect, we have a QA team, you have a peer that'll review it. And generally, if the process works well, you catch the problem before the bad thing has happened. And with AI, you can't tell your customer, sorry, everything broke, my AI did it, right? Someone at the end of the day, you need a human to be accountable. And that's where I feel like a lot of these fears around AI come in is if you do try to just say, okay, cool, I don't need a software developer anymore. I'm just going to use Claude Code and it's going to go and do everything. You're not really thinking through the implications of who's accountable for that code, who maintains it, if Chrome has a breaking update in 6 weeks, or if there's some edge case that doesn't work well. So that's why I feel like the solution to that problem is don't try to use AI as a drop in replacement for people, just like how we didn't use laptops as a drop in replacement for people when the PC revolution happened. But you can look at your workflows and say, how can we make everybody more efficient, more effective? I think that's totally fair game. And maybe the expectations get raised in terms of productivity because we have AI, just like what happened with PCs and mobile phones back in earlier decades. But I think this risk that people run is just kind of taking the obvious view of assuming that the AI can handle everything a person can. AI could probably get you like 75, 80% of the way there, but you'd actually be surprised what percent of an employee's day is spent in that 20% of edge cases when something goes wrong. 'Cause that's where you really need the human judgment. So I think looking at these workflows more in terms of where are the choke points that we can make things more efficient, as opposed to like, how do we not need people at all?
Yes, I totally agree that human interference is still needed. It's not completely gone. AI can do a lot of things like in aircrafts. We do have autopilot modes and we do have backups for that, but we still have pilots. We have the air traffic controller who needs to keep an eye on it. We can't just rely on AI or autopilot mode or even self-driving car. If you see, it's doing pretty good job. Like, you don't have to monitor it, but then we also have to keep in mind the safety and security of people, that it might not hurt. You have to be mindful of that if you are running that company. um, and it's fairly clear that AI safety needs deep research and deep engineering still. It's not yet there. And so AI safety systems has to be architected as a community properly. When they don't work properly, they put people in harm or dangerous situation. So that is about AI safety and security. Now, one of the incredible things about this era is that we no longer have a lot of technological limitations that we had 2 decades back. Now it's all about how much work can be done within the limitations of the energy that you have. So that's the physical limitation, and transporting the bits and the energy it takes to do that stuff. So, what's the biggest concern today in energy efficiency?
Well, I think you're seeing it all over when data centers are being built. They're generally in counties or states where the cost per kilowatt hour is relatively low. Here in San Diego, I think we're 35 cents a kilowatt hour, which is pretty high. So there's not as much maybe here as there is in some of the Midwestern states. And I feel like there's also supply chain shortages. Try buying a stick of DRAM in 2026. You may think it's COVID era again because of all of these data center initiatives gobbling up the available capacity and not leaving a whole bunch left over for consumers. And I think the free market has a way to kind of sort these things out eventually, but it does take time to kind of figure all those pieces out. And that's why I feel like the pushing to 2 nanometer process nodes, more efficient chips is gives you like more capacity compute wise for the same power draw. But if we're having to rebuild the grid and go down to that fundamental infrastructure layer, then you kind of need all the help you can get along the way in terms of additional capacity, in terms of more efficient chips, in terms of lighter weight models that maybe don't need as much power to run. So that's why I think you'll see innovations kind of all across the stack because free market takes time to kind of play things out and eventually stabilize.
And beyond energy, what do you see the most significant scientific or technological limitations we face right now?
I think there's a whole new crop of use cases coming up on much smaller models. And if you see this with these lightweight open weight models that are out there, you really don't need like a billion parameter or multi-billion parameter model for a lot of these use cases. I think there were some rumors that one of the newer GPT 5.1 or 2 might have crossed the trillion parameter threshold. But if you look in business, there's a lot of workflows that are fairly well defined. And you don't really need a model that can draw you a picture, write you a song, research the web, and just do like everything. So I do think that one of the maybe more overlooked innovations are in these tinier models that maybe can't do 15 different things, but it does one thing really well. And you can fit it on a MacBook Air. And maybe there's no cloud backend that's even needed to do those sorts of things. I think that kind of goes hand in hand well with a lot of these business workflows where there's like one task to be done and you want to get through that task quicker. So we're looking at using it on doing things like crunching log lines. Our software stack at Yembo, we make tens of millions of log lines a day from various services talking to each other. It's really helpful to have something that's sort of like a ChatGPT style interface where you can ask it, hey, are there any anomalies? Are there any errors coming up? How does today compare to yesterday? And a lot of these use cases, we're getting pretty remarkable performance on what most people would maybe turn their nose up on for the model being really small. But I think just having a really crisp idea of what exactly the problem you're trying to solve is makes it more open to using these tinier models. And that's where I think is things get really exciting is you may have a workflow that AI can technically solve, but if it costs like $10 an hour to run it, it may not be economically viable to bring AI into that workflow. Not for a technical reason, but just for an economic reason. So if we can bring the cost way down, there are these new use cases that open up that maybe were possible before, but not viable. And now they become viable and things get really exciting at that point. Lots of different directions, but I think that's one that I don't see a lot of headlines about. But whenever I have free time to code, which is not as much as I'd like to have, I'm usually finding that these open weight models are just super capable in a lot of different areas that not a lot of people are talking about.
Mhm. Yeah, along the same lines, looking at your 30 granted patents and your roles in international speaker, what is the next dark data frontier you think companies are completely overlooking as we head into 2026 and beyond?
I think one of the common things, and we see this a lot in the sectors that we operate in, is I think companies are realizing the value of the data that they have. Now, a lot of the challenges that come up are getting access to that data in a format that the AI can use. If you have a paper filing cabinet with historical information on it, it can be maybe hard for an LLM to access that. But I think digitizing and organizing and cleaning that data is an area that I think we'll see more activity in the upcoming years because that's really like the entry price that you need to pay to be able to use AI in a lot of these workflows. And given that like I mentioned before, we have these open weight models that are making private AI much more capable, that you may have use cases where a company may not feel comfortable uploading all the data into Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT. But if it's running there locally and they can clean it and they can have their own like private AI workflows, then I think there's a whole crop of use cases in the medical space, in regulated spaces that sort of become possible. Again, not for a technical change, but more from like a process and a policy change where it's economical and it's private and it's secure.
Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. But before that, I have a 10-second hot take for you.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. So, as a top AI voice, what is the most overhyped AI trend you are seeing right now?
Most overhyped. And that's tough because there's a lot. I would say replacing people. I don't see the value in replacing people. And I think the much more valuable thing is if we use AI to elevate people and to allow them to get more work done, be more fulfilling, exploring areas that nobody's looking at. I think that's much more fascinating personally to focus on. And honestly, it points to a world I'd much rather live in than one where we don't have any need for any people.
Yeah, absolutely. Humans are irreplaceable, so you need humans at least now. What is the biggest AI myth you have to debug when you are delivering keynotes to non technical executives?
I think it's changed. So when I started Yembo, it was convincing people that AI was a direction that's worth pursuing. Nowadays, I feel like there's a lot of bad learning that we're having to undo. Maybe someone in IT saw a headline, tried out a tool, didn't get the outcome that they wanted. So I feel like my posture has kind of become more defensive as of lately. And that's why I've been sharing more about I think my most in-demand talk this year so far, it's only 22 days into the year, but has been why AI fails and how to fix it. And like just packaging up all of the successful deployments that we've done and looking at what did those things get right, comparing it to failed initiatives, and then putting in these safeguards in place so that you kind of get to the outcome that you want to have. I think a couple of years ago, it wasn't really common to assume that somebody would have tried AI. I think that's changed now. Almost everybody is either using AI or there's an understanding that it's sort of inevitable and they'll have to use it. Uh, and then the questions now become more how do you use it, not should I use it? And I think that's been a relatively recent shift in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is the one piece of advice you would give yourself, younger self, to move even faster?
I think just don't be so concerned about about failure. Um, Again, that's not to be reckless, but I think a lot of failures are recoverable, and you can do things to go out of your way to make failure something that is more recoverable. Super early story from like back in our garage days was we wanted more customers and we were cold calling. Well, you can go and make a list of good prospects and cold call. Just try what's the worst that'll happen, right? Is they hang up on you? They tell you no? That's good feedback as you learn what works, what resonates, what doesn't resonate. I was really nervous to get started when we first started cold calling because I consider myself an introvert. I had never done it before. If I'm being honest, the thought of being hung up on or told no was almost debilitating. And it wasn't until I just got started that I started learning these things. And you do get hung up on and it does sting, but you also learn to start setting more realistic expectations for yourself. Like if I just open up the phone book and call 10 numbers, I'm probably not going to have 10 high value prospect conversations. Like maybe one I'll be happy with. And I think just like calibrating those expectations and then being willing to try something and have it not work out is use that scientific method. Is even before I write a LinkedIn post, I'm following the scientific method. I have a hypothesis that my audience will resonate with this message. And if I position it in this way, I'll get this outcome. And sometimes I'm right and sometimes I'm wrong. And when I'm wrong, it's just as helpful as when I'm right because it gives you the feedback and then you can kind of keep on iterating. And I think, especially in those scenarios where you have to put yourself out there, when you're posting something on social media or you're standing on a stage or you're making a phone call, in a lot of cases, if that fails, you don't usually get like mocked and ridiculed and scorned. You usually just get ignored. Like if you just get hung up on, that's not like a fatal thing. You can recover from that. You can kind of move on to the next one. So I think recalibrating those expectations around what is actually the downside if this thing goes poorly, I found is like a really freeing and really like door opening kind of way to look at things, because then you don't get bothered when you get told no. You don't get bothered when a setback comes. You sort of expect it. And then when good things happen, you're pleasantly surprised. It's a much happier way to go through life than always expecting everything to work perfectly and then getting disappointed when things don't quite work out.
Yes. When you were saying this, I was laughing because I don't want to generalize things, but even my husband is a software engineer and he thinks I have a superpower of reaching to anyone. And I'm like, no, I want to write a cool stuff, like cool code like you. And he's like, no, this is actually a really good thing that you could reach out to anyone and you could talk to anyone. And I was like, this
Yeah,
is
it's a skill. It's a skill. Yeah, just like writing code is a skill. And you got good at the coding skill by practicing, just like you get good at this skill by practicing. I think
exactly.
when you think of it in that framework, there's a whole lot more that you can do. And that's what I wish people would focus more on with AI. Is it's not just how do we replace people in these processes, but it's like, hey, what are we not doing because no one has the time? And go explore that. That's why in the past couple of weeks, like you may have seen, we had this AI art installation where work that we put together is now in an art museum. And I think that's what's really exciting about AI is like going in and having a reason to go into a new sector in a new space and go explore things that are unexplored instead of just trying to like repeat the things we've already been doing and trying to get some percent faster with it.
Yeah, and even uh, I didn't know until he said that this is a skill that you have that you can reach out to anyone and you can talk to anyone. I was like, oh, I didn't think about this that I have a skill. So he was like, anybody can write a code, but human side is not everybody, can talk to people. And so, yeah, it's a different side of seeing the skill set. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your journey with us. For our listeners who, if you're looking to dive deeper into the mindset of the technical founder, I highly recommend picking up his book, Grow Up Fast Lessons from an AI Startup. For those interested in his speaking engagement for his work in unlocking the AI advantage, you can find more at Yembo. Reach out to him directly at zachratner.com. I'll also put his LinkedIn and all the details in the description section below. So, Zach, again, thank you so much for showing us that while AI is changing industries, the most successful innovations are still the ones that help humans bring more value to their work. We look forward to seeing you where you take the Yembo next.
Right. Thank you so much, Prachi. Have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, too.